Hi everyone. Today in class we discuss critical inclusive pedagogy framework. And this is the cornerstone for our course. Although our course is called Multicultural Education for Teachers, no matter what culture and background your students come from, if you understand critical inclusive pedagogy net framework and apply it to everything that you do in your classes, then you are making it a more equitable and inclusive experience no matter who is walking into your classroom. So you are assigned readings and a YouTube video from Dr. Saran Stewart, and she's the one who developed the CIP based on the tenets of inclusive pedagogy that were outlined by Dr. Frank Tuitt. So these are the folks that really created this framework. And CIP, or critical inclusive pedagogy in a nutshell, is how do we engage students in education and in the teaching and learning process despite the differences in cultural backgrounds and socioeconomic backgrounds. And something that we did as a Think, Pair, Share in class today was we discussed different aspects of teachers that we really enjoy. And how did those teachers get to know us? How did we end up trusting those teachers? And how did those teachers maybe make us uncomfortable? And how that allowed us to learn. So to begin, let's think about what is a traditional student-teacher interaction. We are having that right now. You are watching me, a professor, lecture at you. This is a dialogical lecture, right? I'm a didactic, where all I'm doing is talking at you. But what we like to do is, while maintaining good classroom management, we want to foster a partnership with our students. We want to engage them in conversation. We want to engage them in democratic practices within the classroom. We want to give them a little bit of ownership to both what they're learning, how they're learning, and a little bit of ownership to how things run in the classroom. And we talked about this in class, and we talked about various ways that we could do this. And something that came out of our discussion was allowing your students to agree upon how class should be run. So if that is discussing the classroom rules, having the students come up with a classroom constitution, giving them that ability to discuss some of the anxieties that come with what they're going to be learning, and creating a respectful and challenging environment to ensure mutual participation. I think the worst thing that happens to us as teachers is we want to have these awesome discussions and then they completely fall flat and your students just stare at you like, why do I have to talk? And why is she picking on me? Or why is he picking on me? And so we need to find ways that we make that dialogical professor-student interaction the norm in our classroom while still maintaining good classroom management. We also need to consider our faculty-student interaction. If your students literally are coming into class and leaving and you don't know anything about them, we really need to take a look at the relationships that we're building with our students and how to build those. Your students are citizens in the classroom, and you want to engage with your students as citizens in the classroom. I always think about that golden rule: treat others how you want to be treated. And I truly believe that if you show a middle schooler or high schooler some respect, you would hope that in return they would respect you. Now, does that always happen? No, and that's why we will be discussing ad nausea classroom management and how to do it the best way. But I think holding high standards, expecting classroom participation, calling students by their correct names and pronouns, and making sure that you're getting to know your students, not just on a student level, but also on a somewhat personal level, right? Understanding their interests, if they're on a sports team, if they are into drama or dance, knowing maybe some of their favorite TV shows, and then creating analogies to what you're talking about in class to things like what's happening on their favorite TV shows or in pop culture. Those are all great ways to foster faculty-student interactions. Also, not calling students out, right? Like if you notice a student in the back of your classroom with their head against the wall and their eyes closed, maybe instead of calling them out that day, you go and talk to them privately after class and find out what's going on. Why has their behavior changed, or why did they come to school less than enthusiastic to learn that day? We also need to consider sharing power. Now, this is terrifying, particularly for our new teachers. So this is something that we might want to ease ourselves into as we become more seasoned teachers. Education in general is a model of authority, and most students are not ready for the responsibility of sharing power, right? Like most students go in, the teacher's the boss, the principal's the boss, and they're there just to listen and absorb. So maybe that's when we can introduce things like having your students recognize that they are responsible for their own learning. I love it. I love it when students say, Dr. Hollander failed me in biology. No, I did not fail you. I provided the assessment that you failed. I provided you with how to create a study guide. I provided you with recordings of my lectures. I provided you with awesome PowerPoints. I provided you with additional resources. If you did not study, if you did not come to my office hours, if you did not listen to me when I said I want you to be successful and I'm going to show you how to be successful, and you did not do those things, then you failed yourself. So I think it's really important, especially for those that are teaching middle schoolers and freshmen, to really get them to think about the ownership they have for their own learning, right? I mean, who traditionally has the power? We talked about this. We talked about the power brokerage between teachers and students, and thinking about a time when you really noticed that power brokerage. And that might be if you were accused of doing something you weren't supposed to, or a teacher deciding last minute to change a deadline, or failing everybody for poor behavior, or taking away a recess or something fun. Those are when the teacher is really brokeraging their power. But I think if your class is mature enough, you can find ways to share that power, and then your students will be more invested in wanting to keep the little bit of power they have. We talked also about the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. If you're familiar with that book, a little mouse, he asks for a cookie, and the people give him a cookie. Then he wants a glass of milk. Then he wants a straw for his milk. And then he wants a napkin. Then he wants this and that. So again, if you are planning on sharing power in your classroom, you need to make sure that you make it clear the power that you plan on sharing and why, and letting them know that, this is important. And if you can't handle this, then we can go back to how classes are traditionally taught. Also, what I think is really important, and I'm going to move myself so you can see this, is utilizing the personal narrative. So, how do we get to know our students? What do you do to get to know your students? What is your plan to get to know your students? If you're planning on having students come in, you teach, and they leave, and all you know them by is maybe a first name, and that's it, that is not going to make you a very good teacher, and your students may not feel like they belong in your classroom. You want to consider that if you expect your students to share about themselves, that you yourself should share a little bit about yourself. Now, because you are the teacher, you can decide how much you want to share. And more importantly, as a teacher, if you ask your students to share about themselves, allow them to decide the level of sharing that they would like to. I always say, share what you're comfortable sharing. Not everybody is going to want to bare their souls in class, nor should they. And you, as a teacher, want to consider what you want shared for you. So students stay in class. We talked about, like, how do you plan on getting to know your students? My science teachers discussed how they could walk around during breakout groups and labs to ask personal questions about how things are going. If they notice their students are wearing sports uniforms, you can ask them how games are going or what position they play, or if a student tells you they're going to be in a play or in a musical, You can ask him about that. My English teachers discussed using personal reflection. And this is a great first day of school thing to discuss, right? So personal reflections could be something as short as fill out this note card. Tell me things about you. Tell me, um, what are your favorite things? What do you dislike? What are you most anxious about this school year? Just to get to know your students. I have a wonderful mentor named Dr. Brian Dewsbury, and he utilizes the personal narrative even in higher education. He has every single one of his freshmen who come through his classroom write a one paper narrative about themselves, and he asks them to write about something that's important to them. And then he keeps them the entire year and he reads them and he basically uses them to connect with his students. So if he has a student who says, I'm going to be the first one to graduate from college in my family, and it's really important for my grandmother to see that I walk across the stage, then if that student comes in for office hours or he needs to contact them about something, he has that background information which he can capitalize on and say, hey, I read that. I think it's really important that you understand how to be successful in my class so that your grandma can see you walk across that stage. And I think that that's important for you to consider when getting to know your students. So do you give your students the opportunity to share their own narrative, and how? Could it be they talk about their favorite historical event? Or if you're a history teacher, maybe they talk about their own personal history. If you're a science teacher, you could talk about what they like and don't like about science, or the same with English or math, or things that happened to them over the summer. How was your summer? Tell me your favorite part and the worst part. So consider how you want to utilize that personal narrative, but giving your students the opportunity to talk about themselves outside of just the confines of that classroom can really help you understand, are there things going on at home? Does your student work multiple jobs? Is there something else that you need to be aware of so that you can help them be successful in your class? And that's when we came back to our personal trajectory. So last week I had you guys write your personal trajectory of what affordances and what barriers did you have to get to where you are today. So consider, what would you be willing to share with your students that you think could help you connect with them? It could be very minor things like maybe you got a C in chemistry and now you're teaching chemistry. So it's okay that you didn't get an A. You can still be successful in this class. Or it could be something like maybe your parents went through a divorce while you were in school. And so now you're a lot more relatable to those students who may also have parents who are getting divorced while they're in your classes. So consider the exercise that we did last week and how you might be able to use that when you are trying to connect with your students. We're going to continue to talk about critical inclusive pedagogy, and more specifically, how we are going to apply different things that we would do in our classes for each tenant next time I see you. Take care and stay well, and thanks.